My life has been a roller coaster of emotions, filled with moments of joy and sorrow. It all began when I was just 6 months old, and my parents were brutally killed by Fulani herdsmen on our farm. I was left alone, crying in the bush, but fate intervened when a kind couple, running from the same herdsmen, stumbled upon me. They took me in, they named me Purity, and I was raised as their own. As a child, I was treated like a queen, showered with love and affection. My adopted parents spoiled me rotten, and I felt like the luckiest child in the world. But everything changed when I was 8 years old. My adopted mother fell ill, and we spent 5 days in the hospital. She recovered, but her demeanor towards me shifted dramatically. On our way back home, she turned cold and distant. She started shouting at me for no reason, and I was confused and scared. When we got home, she moved me to a different room, and I was no longer allowed to sleep beside her. Her behavior became increasingly unbearable. I tried to make sense of it all, but I couldn't understand why she was treating me this way. I would plead with her to be happy, but she would just shout me away. As the days turned into months, her behavior worsened. She gave birth to a baby girl, and I was expected to take care of the child while she treated me like a house help. My adopted father would sometimes intervene, calling me softly and checking if I was okay. But I had to pretend to be happy, fearing my mother's wrath. She would often threaten me, saying that if I told my father about her behavior, I would go hungry. I suffered in silence, unsure of what I had done wrong. The day my father traveled, and I was locked out of the house for coming home late from school, was a turning point. I slept under the staircase, crying uncontrollably. My neighbor, a kind banker, heard my cries and took me in. She asked me what was wrong, and I broke down, telling her everything. That's when I discovered the truth. I wasn't their biological daughter. I was the child they had picked up from the farm after my parents were killed. The revelation shook me to my core. I cried my eyes out, feeling lost and alone. I refused to go back home until my father returned. When my father came back, I demanded to know the truth about my biological parents. He was devastated, knowing that my neighbor had revealed the secret. From that day on, I became withdrawn and depressed. I refused to eat or go to school, insisting that I wanted to find the family of my real parents. My adopted father apologized, promising that my mother would change. But she was just pretending, and I knew it. I started to bond with our neighbor, who became like a mother to me. She guided me and prayed for me, offering words of encouragement. As I grew older, my adopted mother's behavior towards me didn't improve. She was jealous of me, and I didn't understand why. When suitors started coming for me, she would divert them to her daughter, Nancy. It was a pattern that repeated itself, and I was heartbroken. One suitor, a rich man, married Nancy, but she forced me to marry a poor, blind man. I felt like I was being punished, but life had other plans. Nancy died after her husband killed her through domestic violence, and I was left to pick up the pieces. My husband, despite being blind, treated me like a queen. He loved me unconditionally, and I found happiness in our marriage. As my husband's wealth grew, so did our family. We had 2 beautiful children, and life was good. But my adopted mother's bitterness and frustration consumed her. She became jealous of my success and happiness. I decided to forgive her, bringing her and my father to Canada. But she repaid my kindness by trying to poison my food. My husband was devastated when he found out. We planned a trip back to Nigeria for Christmas, but this time, we left her behind. As we boarded the plane to Canada, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had closed a chapter in my life, and it was time to move on. My adopted mother was left to ponder her actions, and I hoped that she would reflect on her behavior. I knew that forgiveness was a process, but I had to prioritize my own well-being. I couldn't let her toxic behavior consume me. My husband and children were my priority now. What do you think about Purity's decision to leave her adopted mother behind? Your advice is needed at the comment section. Okoro was a very poor man, but he had a deep desire to have a boy child to carry on his family name. After many years of praying, his wife finally gave birth to a baby boy, Afamefuna. Okoro was overjoyed and pleaded with Afamefuna to marry in time so that he could give birth to boys to sustain and retain the name of the family. Afamefuna grew up to be a very meek young man, and soon he got married to a beautiful woman named Adaze. Okoro's joy knew no bounds, thinking that his family line would continue. However, fate had other plans. Okoro passed away, and Afamefuna was left to carry on the family legacy. Afamfuna's wife, Adaze, gave birth to 5 beautiful baby girls, Neoma, Afai, Ada, Ezine, and Comfort. After each delivery, her health started deteriorating, and she became weaker. When she gave birth to Comfort, she was told that it was another girl, and she couldn't bear the pain. She passed away, leaving Afamefuna devastated. Afamefuna was heartbroken and frustrated because he couldn't keep the family name alive with no boy child. He became withdrawn and isolated. Before his death, Afamefuna called Comfort, who was just 10 years old then, and told her not to let the family name die off. Comfort promised to honor his wish. As the years went by, Comfort grew up to be a very pretty girl. Suitors started coming for her hand in marriage, but she had a condition for each of them. Comfort's condition was that they adopt male children for her late father, Afamefuna, before marrying her. Many suitors refused, and she remained unmarried. Her 4 elder sisters got married, but Comfort's condition scared off potential husbands. Neoma married a man from a nearby village, Afai married a businessman, Ada married a doctor, and Ezine married an engineer. Comfort's sisters were happy in their marriages, but Comfort's determination to keep the family name alive remained unwavering. One day, a wealthy and handsome man, Nnamdi, came to propose to Comfort. She laid out her condition, and to her surprise, he agreed. Nnamdi adopted 4 boys on Afamfuna's name, and Comfort named them Gift, King, Fred, and David. The boys took Afamfuna's surname. Comfort finally agreed to marry Nnamdi, and they had a beautiful wedding. Nnamdi proved to be a good husband, sacrificing all he had for the boys. However, Comfort couldn't give birth to her own children. Namdi didn't mind, as he loved the adopted boys like his own. As the boys grew up, they were told about their family history and the sacrifices made for them. They were grateful to Comfort and Namdi. The boys did well in business and decided to clean the tears of their aunt, Comfort, and her husband. They wanted to repay their kindness. Gift, King, Fred, and David sat together and discussed ways to show their appreciation. They decided to change their surname to Namdi's, but only the first two sons, Gift and King, did. Fred and David decided to keep the Afamefuna surname, but they all remained close. The brothers took good care of Comfort and Namdi, providing for their needs and making sure they were happy. They would often visit them, take them out for meals, and surprise them with gifts. Comfort and Namdi felt blessed to have such loving children. Years went by, and Namdi and Comfort's marriage reached a milestone 30 years. The brothers wanted to celebrate this special occasion. They planned a surprise gift for their parents. They wanted to give them something that would bring a smile to their faces. After much deliberation, they decided to gift them keys to a duplex and a good car. They wanted to show their appreciation in a tangible way. The brothers worked together to make this dream a reality. They pooled their resources and bought a beautiful duplex in a serene neighborhood. They also bought a brand new car, which they parked in front of the duplex. On the day of the celebration, the brothers presented the gifts to Comfort and Namdi. They were overwhelmed with joy. Comfort couldn't stop crying, seeing the boys she had raised as her own showing such gratitude. Namdi was also beaming with pride. The brothers had organized a big ceremony, inviting friends and family to celebrate the couple's 30 years of marriage. There was food, music, and laughter. Comfort and Namdi cut a cake, and the brothers gave heartfelt speeches, thanking them for their love and care. The celebration continued late into the night, with laughter and music filling the air. Comfort and Namdi felt blessed to have such wonderful children. I still remember my time at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka UNN, especially my days in the Department of Psychology. Those years were filled with unforgettable lessons, some learned the hard way. In that department, two female professors reigned supreme, Professors Uju and Nakem. They weren't just senior lecturers, they were forces to reckon with, and they carried themselves like untouchable goddesses. Their attitudes made the atmosphere in the department tense. They were commanding, strict, and often quite mean. Many students trembled at the thought of crossing them. I often felt intimidated by their presence. A single glance from Professor Uju could silence a hallway. Professor Nakem wasn't much better. Her words cut deeper than a sword. Despite their intimidating nature, they had a few students they favored, and this favoritism wasn't hidden. Two names always popped up: Drive, Ojo, and Dr. Ifeoma. I was lucky, or perhaps unlucky, to be friends with Dr. Ojo, Drive, Odo, and Dr. Ifeoma. We formed a little support system, sharing our daily experiences and frustrations. Among us, Drive, Odo stood out the most. He was brilliant, sharp-minded, diligent, and consistent. His academic record spoke volumes. When the department announced new lecturer vacancies, a ripple of excitement ran through the corridors. Everyone who was qualified began preparing their applications. As the head of department, Professor Uju had the power to recommend candidates. She personally told Drive, Ojo, Drive, Ifoma, and Dr. Odo to apply for the positions. I remember Drive Odo's enthusiasm. He was full of hope, already envisioning how he would contribute to the department in a bigger capacity. But what we didn't know was that Professor Uju had no intention of letting him get the job. Behind closed doors, she was planning a different outcome. One afternoon, I overheard Professor Uju talking to Professor Nakem about Dr. Odo. She was candid. She didn't want him employed and was willing to do whatever it took to stop it. It was shocking to hear that kind of betrayal. Here was a young man she had encouraged to apply, yet she was plotting to sabotage him. Surprisingly, Professor Nakem wasn't on board with the plan. She remained silent at the time, but it was clear she wasn't comfortable with what she had heard. Days later, Professor Nakem made a bold move. She called Drive Odo to her office, a meeting he didn't expect. She told him everything, Professor Uju's plan, the hidden sabotage, and the political games being played. I remember how stunned he looked afterward. She advised him to take a different route, to apply through Imo State government, his home state, so the application would go straight to the vice-chancellor. It was a risky move, but Drive Odo followed her advice. He prepared a new application and sent it through the Imo State channel, bypassing the department's usual process. Meanwhile, Professor Uju was still delaying the signing of his departmental application. She kept giving excuses, pretending to be too busy. Then, the unexpected happened. A letter came from the Vice-Chancellor's office. It was a direct order instructing Professor Uju to sign Drive Odo's application and forward it to the dean's office. Her face, when she received the letter, was a mix of shock and rage. She had been outplayed, and she knew it. But she couldn't defy the vice-chancellor. She signed the application, handed it over, and pretended everything was fine. We all thought the storm had passed. Dr. Odo was relieved, and for a moment, it felt like justice had been served. Unfortunately, we underestimated how far Professor Uju was willing to go. She approached the secretary at the dean's office with a devious request. She told the secretary to, accidentally, misplace Drive Odo's file. The secretary, whether out of fear or loyalty, did as she was told. When we checked the records later, Drive Odo's application was nowhere to be found. It was clear, his file had been deliberately dropped. We were furious but helpless. There was no evidence, only whispers and silent glances that told the truth no one dared to say aloud. Dr. Odo tried to stay hopeful. He said he believed in destiny and that whatever was meant to be would be. But I could see the pain in his eyes. The entire department buzzed with rumors. Some said the final employment list would expose everything, while others believed the truth would stay buried. Then came the moment we had all been waiting for, the day the employment letters were scheduled to be released. The atmosphere in the department was electric. Everyone was eager to see the list of those employed. It list was heartbreaking. Deborah and Charles were the epitome of love. Their bond was unbreakable, and their hearts beat as one. They were each other's rock, supporting and loving each other beyond measures. Charles worked in a bank, and Deborah was a nurse. Their schedules were hectic, but they always made time for each other. One fateful day, Charles had a promotional exam at 8 a.m. He overslept and ran late, forgetting his login status in the process. Deborah, being the loving wife she was, rushed to give him the items he forgot. She sped to the exam center, her heart racing with anxiety. On her way back home, tragedy struck. Deborah was involved in a terrible accident and was rushed to the hospital. The diagnosis was devastating. Deborah was paralyzed from the waist down. Charles's world came crashing down. Despite the challenges, Charles was determined to show Deborah optimal love. He cared for her, bathed her, and fed her, never complaining once. His friends warned him about the toll it was taking on his mental health. "Charles, you're sacrificing too much," they said. "You need to take care of yourself too." Charles battled with his office work, caregiving responsibilities, and children's upkeep. It was hectic, but he refused to give up. Purity, Deborah's caregiver, was a godsend. She helped Charles with Deborah's care, and her assistance was enormous. Charles was grateful for Purity's help. He decided to show his appreciation by giving her a gift. As time passed, Charles's love for Deborah started to dwindle. He found himself drawn to Purity's kindness and beauty. Deborah noticed the change in Charles's behavior. She was frustrated and depressed, feeling like she was losing her husband. Charles informed Deborah of his intentions to appreciate Purity. Deborah was skeptical, sensing something was amiss. Charles bought a golden ring for Purity, knowing she loved assorted rings. Little did Deborah know Charles's intentions. The light of love between Charles and Deborah dwindled more. Deborah felt like she was losing her husband to someone else. Charles asked Deborah to invite Purity over. Deborah hesitated, feeling uneasy about the situation. When Purity arrived, Charles proposed to her in front of Deborah. Deborah slumped and was rushed to the hospital. "How could you, Charles?" Deborah cried. "I thought you loved me." Charles's friends had warned him, "Love is blind, but it shouldn't be foolish." As Deborah lay in the hospital, she wondered, had Charles's love for her truly died? Purity's presence in their lives had changed everything. Deborah felt like she was losing her husband to someone who was supposed to be her caregiver. Charles's decision to propose to Purity had left Deborah shattered. She felt like she was living in a nightmare. "Love is a choice," Deborah remembered her mother saying. But is it still a choice when circumstances change? Deborah's accident had changed everything. Charles's love and devotion had started to wane. Purity's kindness and beauty had captured Charles's heart. Deborah felt like she was competing with someone else. "You can't pour from an empty cup," Charles's friends had told him. "Take care of yourself, Charles." But Charles had refused to listen. He was determined to keep his marriage vows. Now, it seemed like his determination had been in vain. Deborah felt like she was losing her husband. What's a man to do when his wife becomes a burden? Charles's friends asked. Deborah wondered if she was indeed a burden to Charles. Had she become too much for him to handle? The accident had changed everything. Deborah's life was now confined to a wheelchair. Charles's love had been her strength. But now, she felt like she was losing that strength. Purity's presence had brought a new dynamic into their relationship. Deborah felt like she was no longer the center of Charles's universe. Love is about sacrifice, Deborah remembered. But is it still love when the sacrifice becomes too much? Charles's proposal to Purity had left Deborah speechless. She didn't know what to say or do. As she lay in the hospital, Deborah wondered if she would ever regain Charles's love. You can't force love, Charles's friends said. If it's meant to be, it will be. But Deborah wasn't sure if she believed that. She felt like she was fighting a losing battle. Purity's role in their lives had changed everything. Deborah felt like she was no longer the priority. Deborah lay in the hospital bed, her mind racing with thoughts. She couldn't help but think about the incident that had changed her life forever. What exactly was it that put me in this wheelchair? She asked herself, tears welling up in her eyes. The answer echoed in her mind: Charles's promotional exam. If only she hadn't rushed to give him his login status, she might not have been involved in that terrible accident. Deborah's eyes filled with tears as she thought about it. My genuine sacrifice has eaten me raw, she whispered to herself. Took a toll on my life negatively. She couldn't help but regret the decision to rush to the exam center. Why did I have to go? She asked herself. Why couldn't Charles have just rescheduled the exam? But deep down, Deborah knew that Charles's career was important to him. She had wanted to support him, to be there for him. Now, she lay in a hospital bed, her life forever changed. Deborah felt like she was paying the price for her sacrifice. Is this what they mean by the price of love? She wondered. Is this what it means to put someone else's needs before your own? Deborah's thoughts were consumed by regret and what-ifs. She couldn't help but think about what could have been if only things had been different. As Deborah lay in the hospital bed, she couldn't help but think about Charles's proposal to Purity. She felt a pang of sadness and betrayal. How could he do this to me? She wondered. After everything I've been through, how could he just give up on us? Deborah's mind was filled with questions, but she knew she might never get the answers she was looking for. She thought about the days when Charles would care for her, bathe her, and feed her. Those moments seemed like a distant memory now. Deborah's heart ached as she realized that Charles's love for her had dwindled. She felt like she was losing him, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. As she lay there, Deborah couldn't help but wonder what the future held for her. Would she ever walk again? Would Charles ever love her the way he used to? The uncertainty of it all was overwhelming. Deborah felt like she was losing control of her life, and she didn't know how to regain it. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. Why did this have to happen to me? She whispered to herself. Deborah's thoughts were consumed by regret, sadness, and uncertainty. She felt like she was trapped in a nightmare, and she didn't know how to wake up. As the darkness closed in around her, Deborah couldn't help but wonder if she would ever find happiness again. Purity's operation was a success, but she wouldn't be walking anytime soon. The doctor's words hit Charles like a ton of bricks. His wife would be confined to a wheelchair. Charles felt like his world had come crashing down. He remembered Deborah's kindness and rushed to her house, hoping she'd understand his new situation. When he arrived, Deborah was recovering from her false labor scare and the misunderstanding she had with Samuel because of Charles' frequent calls and messages. Deborah was able to convince the husband against all odds. However, Charles explained Purity's condition, and Deborah's heart went out to them. "I'll do whatever it takes to help," Deborah promised, her eyes welling up with tears. Charles was overwhelmed with gratitude. He didn't know how he'd repay Deborah's kindness despite his treatment to Deborah, but he knew he'd be eternally grateful. Charles always echoes in his mind, "Deborah is an angel, I've missed her forever." Even that Samuel and Deborah had settled over Charles' frequently calls, Samuel, Deborah's husband, was still puzzled about the mysterious transfer she made to Charles. He confronted Deborah, who explained the situation. Samuel's expression softened as he listened. "We'll support them," he said, "but we need to set boundaries." Deborah nodded in agreement. Together, they devised a plan to help Charles and Purity. Purity was discharged from the hospital, and Charles brought her home to their small apartment. Deborah visited often, bringing groceries and helping with Purity's care. As the days passed, Charles grew more dependent on Deborah's kindness. He began to feel guilty, knowing his ill treatment to Deborah. One day, Deborah suggested they move in with her family temporarily. Charles hesitated, but Purity's needs won out. The transition was chaotic, but Deborah's family welcomed Charles and Purity with open arms. Samuel became a source of guidance for Charles, offering words of encouragement and support. Purity slowly adjusted to her new life. Deborah helped her with physical therapy, and they bonded over shared experiences. As Charles watched Purity smile again, he felt a sense of hope. Maybe this tragedy would lead to something beautiful. Deborah's family became a surrogate family to Charles and Purity. They shared meals, stories, and laughter. Charles realized that sometimes, help comes in unexpected ways. He vowed to pay it forward someday. Purity's condition stabilized, and she began to find joy in her new reality. Charles and Deborah's friendship deepened. Samuel smiled as he saw his wife's kindness transform lives. "You're an angel, Deborah," he said. Deborah blushed, knowing her actions had brought hope to those in need. As they sat together as a family, Charles turned to Deborah and said, "You've changed our lives forever." As time passed, Charles grew increasingly dependent on Deborah's support. He began to take her kindness for granted, and his gratitude turned into expectation. Purity, sensing the change in Charles, felt her heart breaking. One day, Charles received a job offer in another city. He was torn between his responsibility towards Purity and the opportunity to rebuild his life. In a moment of weakness, he chose to pursue the job, leaving Purity behind. "I'm sorry, Purity," Charles said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll send you money, I promise." Purity's eyes welled up with tears as she realized she'd been abandoned. "How could you, Charles?" she whispered. Meanwhile, Charles's thoughts drifted to Deborah. He remembered her kindness, her compassion, and her beauty. He began to crave her presence in his life again, convincing himself that he'd made a mistake by staying with Purity. Charles arrived in the new city and started his new job. He couldn't shake off the feeling of emptiness, and his thoughts lingered on Deborah. He decided to reach out to her, hoping she'd forgive him for his past mistakes. "Deborah, I've been thinking about you," Charles said, his voice filled with longing. "I realize now that I made a mistake by staying with Purity. I want you to come back to my life." Deborah was taken aback by Charles's confession. She had moved on, finding happiness with Samuel. "Charles, I'm married now," she said firmly. "I've found happiness with Samuel. You need to make amends with Purity." Charles's face fell, but he refused to give up. He knew he'd hurt Purity, but he couldn't resist the pull of Deborah's kindness and beauty. He became determined to win Deborah back, no matter the cost. As Charles's obsession with Deborah grew, Purity's heart broke further. She realized she'd been abandoned not just physically but also emotionally. She wondered if she'd ever find happiness again. The story takes a darker turn as Charles's actions become more erratic. Will he realize his mistakes, or will his obsession consume him? What will happen to Purity, and how will Deborah respond to Charles's advances? The drama unfolds in episode 5.
In the bustling city of Douala, Cameroon, two sisters, Blessing and Favor, lived in a small apartment tucked away in one of the city's crowded neighborhoods. They shared everything: hope, dreams, struggles, and a deep desire for something more than the life they had. Their father had passed away years ago, and since then, the sisters had relied on each other to survive. But survival had become a daily battle against poverty, and it felt like the universe had forgotten them. Blessing, the older of the two, had always been determined to find a way out. She was ambitious and impatient, willing to take risks if it meant she could escape their life of struggle. Favor, on the other hand, was more cautious and thoughtful, believing that success would come through hard work and persistence. But even she could not deny the mounting pressure to find a way out of their financial misery. One evening, as they sat together, Blessing overheard a conversation between two of their neighbors in the market. They whispered of a juju herbalist who could grant wealth through powerful rituals, quick, easy money for those who were desperate enough to seek it. The idea sparked something inside Blessing. She was intrigued, excited by the thought of transforming their lives with just one visit. Favor was hesitant, of course. She had always believed that shortcuts came with consequences. But Blessing's insistence wore her down. She could see the desperate hunger in her sister's eyes, the same hunger that burned in her own chest. The thought of a life free from the constant struggle, The thought of living without worrying about the next meal was too tempting. So, the two sisters decided to visit the herbalist. The herbalist's shrine was located deep in one of Douala's older districts, hidden away behind overgrown trees and winding alleys. The air inside the shrine was thick with incense, the faint smell of herbs, and the haunting stillness that came with ancient rituals. The herbalist was an old man, his face lined with deep wrinkles, his eyes sharp and calculating. "You have come for power," he said, his voice deep and echoing. "Power to change your fate." Blessing and Favor nodded eagerly. "These perfumes," he continued, handing them each a small, ornate bottle, "are the key. You must give them to your mother. The first person she sprays will be richer than the other." The sisters took the bottles, their hands shaking with anticipation. The herbalist's words lingered in their minds as they left the shrine, their hearts racing. This was it. The chance to escape the clutches of poverty had finally arrived. On their way home, the path seemed longer than usual, as if the weight of the bottles in their hands made the journey feel like an eternity. But Blessing's thoughts were already racing ahead. She imagined the wealth that would come their way, the success that would be theirs. She thought of the luxurious lifestyle, the freedom, the respect they would earn. She couldn't wait. As they neared their apartment, Blessing looked at Favor, who was quietly following behind. A selfish thought crossed her mind. What if I could be the one to prosper? She wondered. Without thinking, she pushed Favor roughly into the nearby gutter. Favor yelped in surprise, the muddy water splashing around her. But Blessing didn't look back. She was already running ahead, desperate to reach their mother first. What Blessing didn't know was that earlier that day, their mother had been given a prophecy by a strange little boy she met on her way to the market. The boy had stopped her in the middle of the street, his eyes wide with an unsettling intensity. "Your children will give you perfumes to spray," the boy said, his voice barely a whisper. "Do not spray them, for if you do, you will die." The mother had shaken off the encounter, dismissing it as nothing more than a strange warning from a child. But now, as Blessing entered their home, holding the perfume in her hand, the words of the prophecy echoed in her mind. "Mama, I brought you a gift," Blessing said, smiling with a glint of excitement in her eyes. "This perfume will make you rich, just like the herbalist promised." The mother froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The perfume in her daughter's hand was too familiar, the same one the boy had warned her about. She tried to calm her racing thoughts, but the fear was overwhelming. "No, Blessing," the mother said, her voice trembling. "I can't spray it." The prophecy said. But Blessing wasn't listening. She was too eager, too focused on the promise of wealth that the perfume symbolized. "Please, Mama, just spray it. You deserve this. We deserve this. We've suffered for too long." The mother shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't. I won't. I remember what he said." But Blessing wasn't about to give up. Mama, please, she insisted, stepping closer to her mother. You've worked so hard. We've worked so hard. This is the answer. The pressure was too much. The mother's heart broke as she looked into her daughter's pleading eyes. She had always wanted to give her children a better life, and this perfume seemed like the answer to all their problems. But something inside her told her to resist. In a moment of weakness, as Blessing turned her back to beg once more, the mother made a fateful decision. She sprayed the perfume into the air, the scent quickly filling the room. As soon as the mist touched Blessing's skin, her body stiffened. She let out a gasp, and then she collapsed to the ground, lifeless. The room fell silent, the air thick with disbelief. Favor, who had finally made it home after her fall into the gutter, ran into the apartment. She froze in shock at the sight of her sister's lifeless body. Blessing, she cried, rushing to her side. The mother, sobbing uncontrollably, explained everything, the prophecy, the warning, and how Blessing had pushed her to spray the perfume. I didn't want to, Favor. I couldn't stop her, the mother sobbed. Favor's eyes filled with tears as she looked at her sister's body. Her heart ached with grief and guilt, but she also felt a sense of horror creeping in. She quickly grabbed her own bottle of perfume and tried to hide it, but the mother, seeing her actions, became suspicious. Where is your perfume, Favor? She demanded, her voice shaky but firm. Favor hesitated. Her mind raced with fear. She ran outside, hoping to bury the perfume before her mother could stop her. She found a spot in the backyard and buried the bottle deep in the ground. But the mother followed, her heart heavy with the weight of what had happened. She watched silently as Favor buried the perfume. Then, later that night, she went into the forest behind their house. There, she unearthed the perfume and confronted Favor again. Explain yourself, she said, her voice cold and demanding. Why did you hide it from me? Favor, trembling with fear, confessed everything. She told her mother about the herbalist's shrine and the rituals they had hoped would bring them wealth. She had wanted to escape their struggles, just like Blessing. With no answers, Favor led the villagers to the herbalist's shrine. When they arrived, they found the place deserted, and the herbalist lay dead on the floor, his face frozen in terror. Favor screamed in disbelief. The ritual had backfired in the worst possible way. Desperately, she ran from the shrine, but her mind was spiraling, her thoughts unraveling. The weight of her actions had crushed her spirit. Back home, the mother, overwhelmed by the grief of losing her daughter, fainted. She was rushed to the hospital, but her body could no longer bear the strain. The hospital staff worked quickly to stabilize her, but the damage was done. Favor sat beside her mother in the hospital, her heart filled with regret. The dreams of wealth had led them down a dark path, one filled with death and devastation. She realized now that some desires, no matter how strong, come with a price too high to pay. As the sun set over the city of Douala, the weight of their choices pressed down on them all. The sisters' pursuit of wealth had led to the loss of life, the unraveling of their family, and the ruin of everything they had hoped for. In the end, the cost of the desire for riches was far more than they could ever have imagined. Once, in a quiet African village nestled between green hills and flowing rivers, there lived a woman named Amara. She was married to a strong and kind man, Kofi, who worked as a foreman for the local oil company. Amara and Kofi shared a simple yet joyful life, blessed with their 1-year-old son, Namdi. The couple was content, and their home was always filled with laughter and love. The peaceful village, with its vibrant culture and rich traditions, was the perfect place to raise a child, and the couple's hopes were high for the future. But one fateful night, tragedy struck. Kofi was betrayed by men he considered friends, greedy men who wanted to steal the wealth his family had inherited from his late father. In an act of unthinkable treachery, they murdered Kofi and set his wife on fire, leaving nothing but ashes behind. The only survivor was the baby boy, Namdi, left crying in the darkened house. He was too young to understand the evil that had unfolded around him, but something deep within him began to change that night. Unbeknownst to the killers, Namdi was no ordinary child. He was a strange being, a child born with the wisdom of the ancients. His spirit was ancient and wise beyond his years. When the killers discovered that the infant was alive, they feared the repercussions of their actions. The truth, they knew, would one day catch up with them. So, they made a decision, one that would shape the boy's fate forever. They decided to sell him to a barren couple in a distant village, hoping that the boy's origins would be forgotten in the hands of strangers. The couple, Abina and Ngozi, had longed for a child for many years. After years of trying and failing, they had finally resigned themselves to the idea that they would never know the joy of parenthood. However, when the opportunity to adopt Namdi presented itself, they gratefully accepted. They were unaware of his true origins, and the boy was raised in their home as their own. Namdi grew up under their care, and they loved him as much as any parent could. They could not have known that the child they had taken in would one day uncover the darkest secrets of their past. From a young age, Namdi displayed remarkable intelligence. He could speak clearly long before most children could, and his thoughts were more profound than those of the elders in the village. At the age of 6, Namdi could solve complex problems that left the adults stunned. He was always calm, composed, and perceptive, as though he understood the world in a way others could not. His wisdom, though extraordinary, seemed to come from a place beyond his years, and soon, people from neighboring villages began seeking his counsel. Despite all of this, there was always a lingering emptiness in Namdi's heart. He could not shake the feeling that he was meant for something greater, that there was more to his past than what he had been told. He felt disconnected from the people around him, as though he didn't truly belong. Deep within, he knew that the pain of his past would one day catch up with him, and that his journey was far from over. When Namdi turned 15, he began having strange dreams. He saw images of his mother, Amara, and his father, Kofi, both of whom he had never known. In his dreams, their faces were filled with sorrow, and he could hear the sounds of screams, fire, and betrayal. The visions were haunting, and they left Namdi with an overwhelming sense of sadness and anger. In these dreams, he saw the faces of the men who had killed his parents, men he had never met but somehow knew were responsible for his suffering. Determined to uncover the truth, Namdi set out on a journey. He asked his adopted parents, Abina and Ngozi, about his origins, but they had no answers for him. They told him only that he had been brought to their village as a child and that they had raised him as their own. But this was not enough for Namdi. He knew that his story was bigger than this, that there was more to discover. With a quiet resolve, Namdi set out alone to trace the killer's footsteps back to their village. It was a journey that would take him through thick forests and across vast plains. He traveled by day and camped by night, often meditating to seek guidance from his inner wisdom. His heart was heavy, but his spirit remained strong. As he neared the village of the killers, he felt a strange pull, as though something was drawing him closer to the truth. He arrived at the village one evening, and it was there that he met Adise, the only daughter of the men who had murdered his parents. Adise was a beautiful young woman, full of life and grace. She had grown up in the shadow of her parents' influence, believing them to be honorable and righteous. But Nnamdi, with his deep wisdom, saw through her facade. There was a sadness in her eyes, a flicker of doubt that Nnamdi could not ignore. When they met, Adise did not recognize him, for he was a stranger to her, but there was something in his gaze that made her feel as though she had known him for a lifetime. Over time, Nnamdi and Adise became friends. They spent long hours talking, and Nnamdi slowly began to unravel the truth of her family's dark past. He told her everything, how her parents had betrayed and killed his own mother and father. Adise was stunned. The truth was too much for her to bear, and her world began to crumble. She had grown up idolizing her parents, believing that they were good and kind. Now, the reality was much darker. As the days passed, Adise found herself torn between the love she had for her parents and the undeniable truth that they had committed unspeakable crimes. Nnamdi, with his gentle wisdom, helped her see the reality of her family's actions. Adise, though devastated, knew that she could not ignore the truth. She could not continue to support the men who had murdered Nnamdi's parents. Together, Nnamdi and Adise began to plan their next move. They knew that justice needed to be served, but they also knew that confronting Adise's parents would not be easy. The killers, desperate to protect their wealth, would not go down without a fight. But Nnamdi was no ordinary young man, and Adise had become fierce in her resolve. One evening, Nnamdi and Adise went to the home of her parents. They confronted them with the truth of their past, the murder of Amara and Kofi. The killers tried to deny their actions, but Nnamdi and Adise stood firm. The confrontation escalated, and in the heat of the moment, a violent struggle ensued. Adise's parents, in the desperation, fought back, but Nnamdi and Adise, fueled by justice and the righteousness of their cause, prevailed. In the end, the killers were no more, and justice was finally served. With the death of Adise's parents, Nnamdi and Adise reclaimed the oil well that had been stolen from his family. They stood together in front of the well, watching as the land began to transform. The oil well, once a symbol of loss and betrayal, now stood as a testament to their courage and the reclaiming of their rightful heritage. Nnamdi took Adise to his original biological family's home, where he was reunited with his birth relatives. There, they held a grand feast to celebrate the victory and the return of the oil well. The village rejoiced, for the oil well was a source of prosperity that would benefit the entire community. Adise, now fully accepted into Nnamdi's family, felt a sense of peace she had never known before. In the years that followed, Nnamdi and Adise were married, and they were blessed with 3 beautiful children. They created a home filled with love and wisdom, where their children grew up with both the teachings of their parents and the blessings of their ancestors. The family prospered, and the oil well became a symbol of hope and renewal for the village. Nnamdi never forgot the parents who had raised him, despite the tragic past. He took care of them in their old age, providing for them as they had provided for him. When they passed, he gave them a befitting burial, ensuring that they were honored in death, just as they had been in life. He did this not out of obligation, but out of the deep understanding that family, no matter the circumstances, deserved respect. But as time passed, Adise began to feel a heavy sorrow. The weight of the choices they had made, the violence, the killing, began to haunt her. She had never wanted her parents to die, but she had been forced into a corner by the truth. The guilt consumed her, and she felt an overwhelming sense of regret. What if there had been another way? One day, Nnamdi noticed the sadness in his wife's eyes. He could feel her inner turmoil and knew that she needed help. As a therapist, he had spent years helping others work through their emotional struggles, but now it was his turn to help the woman he loved. Nnamdi gently took Adiz's hand and led her through a series of therapeutic sessions. He used his wisdom and empathy to guide her through the pain and guilt she was feeling. Together, they explored her emotions, and Nnamdi helped her understand that while the past could not be changed, healing could still take place. Through these sessions, Adiz began to release her guilt and found peace in her heart. As word spread about Nnamdi's work as a counselor, people from all over the village and beyond came to seek his help. They brought their emotional struggles, their pain, and the doubts, hoping to find healing. Nnamdi and Adiz opened their home to those in need, and together, they helped countless individuals work through their challenges. Their home became a sanctuary for those seeking peace, a place where people could come and find solace in the darkest hours. In time, both Nnamdi's biological and adopted families lived in harmony, united by love, understanding, and mutual respect. The village flourished, and the memory of the past was honored in a way that allowed everyone to move forward with hope. Nnamdi, Adiz, and their children continued to live a life full of purpose and meaning, knowing that peace was found not only in reclaiming the oil well but in healing the hearts of those who had suffered. Answer: the story of Nnamdi, the wise child who had risen from tragedy, became a legend in the land, a testament to the power of wisdom, love, and forgiveness. Through his journey, the village had learned that true healing came not from vengeance but from compassion and understanding. The legacy of Nnamdi's family, both biological and adopted, endured for generations, and the land was filled with peace, prosperity, and love. In the heart of Africa, amidst the sprawling savannas and thick forests, there lay a small but prosperous village known as Akoro. The village was famous for its wisdom, strength, and unity, which had been passed down through generations. Akoro was ruled by Chief Oba Ajani, a wise and respected leader who was known far and wide for his fair governance and his deep understanding of the traditions and spiritual beliefs of their people. He had a beloved wife, Nana Eniola, and together they had a young son named Kofi. Kofi was a bright and inquisitive boy, loved by all. He spent his days playing in the village with the other children and learning from the elders. He was particularly close to his father, often sitting by his side, listening intently to stories of the ancestors and learning the ways of leadership. The people of Akoro held great hopes for him, as it was clear that Kofi was destined for greatness. But as Kofi grew, his village was struck by tragedy. One dark night, when the moon was hidden behind storm clouds, a group of marauders descended upon Akoro. These were fierce warriors from a neighboring kingdom, notorious for the greed and cruelty. They sought to capture the chief's son, seeing him as a valuable prize to use in future negotiations with other tribes. Under the cover of darkness, they raided the village, taking Kofi with them, and leaving behind a trail of destruction. Kofi's mother, Nana Eniola, was devastated by the loss of her son, and Chief Oba Ajani, though heartbroken, vowed to one day reclaim his son. The people of Akoro mourned the loss, but they did not give up hope. They believed that one day, Kofi would return to lead them, and so they kept the memory of their stolen prince alive in their hearts. The marauders took Kofi to the distant kingdom, far beyond the jungles and mountains that bordered Akoro. The land was foreign to Kofi, and the people spoke in strange tongues. He was thrown into a life of hardship and forced to serve the very people who had taken him from his home. As the years passed, Kofi's life became a mix of labor, servitude, and survival. Yet, through it all, he never forgot where he came from. His mind remained sharp, and his spirit unbroken. The ruler of the Marauders' kingdom was a cruel and cunning man named King Adisa. He saw potential in Kofi, admiring the young boy's strength, intelligence, and resilience. When Kofi reached the age of 16, King Adisa brought him into the royal court. He made Kofi his advisor, impressed by his sharp mind and ability to quickly grasp matters of politics and war. Although he was still a prisoner, Kofi now had access to the inner workings of the kingdom. He learned the art of diplomacy, the strategies of warfare, and the subtleties of power. His wisdom and insight won the respect of the court, and soon, Kofi was one of the king's most trusted allies. Despite his newfound status, however, Kofi's heart remained with Okoro. He dreamed of returning one day to reclaim his birthright. Years passed, and Kofi grew into a young man of remarkable character. He had not only become a skilled diplomat and strategist but had also earned the respect of the kingdom's military leaders. One day, while observing a military campaign, he saw an opportunity. The kingdom he had been held captive in was vulnerable, weakened by internal strife and rebellion. Kofi saw that the time was ripe to escape and return home to Okoro. One stormy night, under the cover of darkness, Kofi seized the opportunity. He slipped away from the palace, evading the guards and making his way through the dense forests toward freedom. The journey back to Okoro was perilous, but Kofi's determination kept him going. After weeks of traveling, he finally returned to the land of his birth. Upon his arrival, Kofi found that much had changed. His father, Chief Oba Ajani, had passed away during his absence, and his uncle, Chief Olanrawaju, had taken the throne. The village of Okoro was now ruled by this new leader, who had seized power when the old chief grew ill. The people of Okoro were not happy with Olanrawaju's rule, for he was a man of ambition, driven more by greed than wisdom. The villagers longed for the return of the true leader, the son of Chief Oba Ajani. Kofi, though older and wiser, was deeply troubled by the changes in his village. He realized that he had a rightful place as the heir to the throne, and he was determined to take it back. Armed with the knowledge he had gained during his years in the foreign kingdom, Kofi approached the elders of Okoro. He spoke of the injustices that had befallen his family and his people, of the darkness that had overtaken the land in his absence. The elders listened intently to Kofi's words and saw the strength in his spirit. They knew he was the true heir, the one who would bring prosperity back to Okoro. The people, too, rallied behind Kofi, remembering the boy they had once known and loved. Soon, a great conflict broke out between Kofi and his uncle, Chief Olanrawaju. The battle for the throne was fierce. Kofi, having learned the ways of war and strategy, led his followers with brilliance. His knowledge of diplomacy and military tactics allowed him to outsmart his uncle's forces at every turn. Kofi's supporters, many of whom had remained loyal to his father, fought with unwavering determination, for they knew that the rightful heir had returned. In the end, Kofi's forces were victorious. Chief Olanrawaju was overthrown, and Kofi ascended to the throne as the rightful ruler of Okoro. The people rejoiced, for the son of the beloved chief had returned to lead them once again. Kofi's reign marked the beginning of a new era for Okoro, an era of peace, prosperity, and unity. As a wise and just ruler, Kofi expanded Okoro's influence, forging alliances with neighboring tribes and bringing wealth to the kingdom. He married 3 beautiful and strong women from different tribes, each of them playing an important role in the governance of Okoro. They bore him 8 children, 4 sons and 4 daughters. His children grew up in the palace, educated in the ways of leadership, and trained to one day carry on their father's legacy. However, despite Kofi's wisdom and strength, his first son, Akin, was different from the others. Akin was proud, ambitious, and full of rebellious energy. From a young age, Akin challenged his father's authority. He questioned Kofi's decisions, arguing that the old ways of ruling no longer served the kingdom. He believed that Okoro needed a new order, one that would reflect his own bold ideas and vision for the future. As the years passed, Akin's defiance grew stronger. He surrounded himself with like-minded individuals in the royal court, and slowly, he began to amass power. Kofi, seeing his son's growing ambition, grew concerned. He tried to guide Akin, teaching him the importance of patience and wisdom in leadership. But Akin would not listen. He believed his time had come, and he was determined to take the throne for himself. One day, while Kofi was away on a diplomatic mission, he engaged in discussions with the elders of a neighboring village. Akin saw an opportunity to seize power. He gathered a group of loyal followers, including influential members of the royal court, and launched a rebellion against his father. The palace erupted into chaos as Akin declared himself king, overthrowing Kofi's rule. Kofi returned to Akoro to find his kingdom in turmoil. His son, the boy he had raised and loved, had turned against him. Akin's supporters cheered for the young prince who had risen to power, while Kofi's loyalists were left to mourn the fall of the beloved king. Kofi, though heartbroken, knew that he could not fight against his own blood. With a heavy heart, he abdicated the throne, stepping aside to allow his son to rule. Akin's reign, however, was not as glorious as he had hoped. Though he ruled with an iron fist, his leadership was marked by division and unrest. The people of Akoro, once united under Kofi's wise rule, now found themselves divided. Akin's harsh policies and disregard for tradition alienated many of his subjects. The kingdom began to unravel, and the prosperity that Kofi had brought to Akoro began to fade. Kofi, having abdicated the throne, left the palace and wandered the land as a humble sage. He traveled from village to village, offering wisdom to those who sought it. The people of Akoro still remembered their former king, and they continued to honor him, though he no longer wore the crown. As the years passed, the story of Kofi, the stolen child who became a king, spread far and wide, becoming a tale of wisdom, power, and the consequences of rebellion. Answer: the kingdom of Akoro, once a beacon of peace and prosperity, fell into chaos under the rule of a king who had been shaped by ambition rather than wisdom. But in the hearts of the people, the memory of the great King Kofi lived on, a reminder that true leadership is not about power, but about the service and wisdom one brings to their people. Kofi's legacy, though overshadowed by his son's rebellion, would endure in the stories of the land for generations to come.